Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really pivotal area in India's energy transition. Standalone Energy Storage Systems.
Right.
Or ESS.
Right, ESS. And these aren't just, batteries tacked onto a solar farm.
Exactly. They're independent powerhouses, really, with the potential to reshape our grid quite significantly.
Precisely. As India pushes forward with its, massive renewable energy build-out, the grid itself needs to become much more flexible, more resilient. And standalone ESS are emerging as a really crucial tool for that. They offer this operational independence that, frankly, paired storage solutions just can't match.
We've got a pretty comprehensive recent report here that really unpacks the evolution, concurrent trends, and importantly, the real-world challenges facing this standalone ESS market.
Right.
And what struck me is that fundamental difference you mentioned. It's not just about storing solar power for later. This is about optimizing the grid itself.
That's absolutely the key. Standalone ESS can be placed strategically, purely based on grid needs. So think frequency regulation, managing peak demand, providing those vital ancillary services that basically keep the whole system running smoothly. It allows for a much more, let's say, agile approach to handling the variability that comes with solar and wind power.
And the report points to some serious momentum building up.
Yeah.
Especially in the first quarter this year, 2025. Tendering activity seems to have really shot up.
Oh, absolutely. The numbers are quite telling. In just those first 3 months of 2025, we saw something like 6.1 gigawatts of standalone ESS tenders issued.
Wow, 6.1 gigawatts.
Yeah, and to put that in context, that's about 64% of all utility-scale energy storage tendering in that period. It's a very clear signal of where the market's focus is shifting.
Okay, so let's get into the weeds here. Our mission today is to pull out the most critical insights from this report. We want to understand what's driving this expansion, the technologies involved, and crucially, the hurdles that still need clearing to, fully realize the potential here for India's energy future.
Right.
So where should we start? The applications.
I think that makes sense. To really grasp the significance, we need to understand the fundamental jobs these standalone ESS do. At their core, they basically decouple when energy is generated from when it's consumed.
Okay. Time shifting.
Time shifting, yes. But it's more than that. It allows for strategic storage and release of power to provide a whole suite of essential grid services.
So beyond just meeting demand later, what are the main ways these independent systems are being used?
Well, a primary one is definitely bolstering grid stability and flexibility. As you add more variable renewables, you can get frequency fluctuations, voltage imbalances. Standalone ESS acts as a kind of dynamic stabilizer. It provides rapid frequency response, crucial voltage support, basically making the grid more resilient and reducing the need for, say, fossil fuel plants just sitting there as backup.
So it's like a sophisticated shock absorber for the grid, smoothing out the bumps from renewables, ensuring things stay steady. What else?
Another really vital area is electricity cost savings. Think about time of use optimization.
Buying low, selling high, essentially.
Pretty much. ESS can store electricity when it's cheap, maybe off-peak hours, or when there's tons of solar power flooding the grid and then discharge it during peak demand when prices shoot up.
Okay.
This obviously helps big industrial and commercial users, but it also significantly eases the financial burden on the distribution companies, the discoms. They face huge costs for procuring power during those peak hours.
And those peak power costs are a massive headache for discoms, as the report really highlights. This could be a major source of relief for them.
A huge relief. Then there's peak shaving. India has this very pronounced evening peak demand right when solar generation starts to drop off.
Yeah, the sun goes down, everyone turns on the lights and AC.
Exactly. Standalone ESS can step in during those crucial hours, reducing the need to fire up expensive, often polluting peaker plants. This is particularly useful for commercial and industrial folks using behind-the-meter storage to manage their demand charges, too.
That evening peak is such a persistent challenge. So having a dedicated tool like standalone storage to tackle it directly is, pretty significant. Any other key roles?
Absolutely. We have to talk about ancillary services. These are the sort of real-time support functions that keep the grid balanced moment to moment.
Okay, what does that include?
Things like mitigating grid congestion in specific areas, regulating frequency with really high precision, providing voltage support where needed, and managing rapid changes in generation or demand, what we call ramping. As we get more and more renewables onto the grid, these ancillary services become absolutely critical for maintaining stability.
So it's not just passive storage, it's actively participating in that delicate balancing act. Fascinating. Are there other, maybe less common applications?
The report does mention a few others. Providing black start capability, which is crucial for restarting the grid after a major blackout.
Right.
They can also help alleviate grid congestion, as I mentioned, enhance transmission efficiency by injecting power strategically, and even dampen electrical oscillations in the network that could cause instability.
Wow, okay. It's clear standalone ESS offers this really diverse and essential toolkit for a modernizing grid. Let's shift gears now and look at the evolution of standalone storage tenders. The report suggests a real boom in this area.
Indeed. As we touched on with those Q1 2025 numbers, standalone ESS tenders are now grabbing the lion's share of the utility-scale storage tendering market. It's a very significant shift, showing a clear market preference for these independent solutions.
And the report draws a line between these and other types, like solar plus BESS or FDRE projects. What's the key difference in focus there?
Right. So solar plus BESS, or firm and dispatchable renewable energy FDRE, those tenders inherently bundle renewable generation with storage. Standalone ESS tenders, on the other hand, focus purely on the storage asset itself.
Got it.
And that's what enables the independent operation and that flexible deployment we've been talking about.
So what factors have really kicked off this surge in standalone ESS tender issuance? What are the enablers?
Several key things have come together. The big one is probably the introduction of Viability Gap Funding, or VGF, that directly tackles the high upfront capital costs, which have been a major barrier.
VGF.
Plus, we've seen a welcome easing of some financial requirements, things like the earnest money deposit, performance bank guarantees, and also lower net worth criteria for bidders. This has basically opened the door for more players to participate.
Sounds like a concerted policy effort to de-risk these projects and get more people involved. Now, the report mentions variations in how these tenders are structured. What are the main differences we're seeing?
The main variations are around the required storage duration and the specified technology. For battery energy storage systems, BES tenders usually ask for durations somewhere between 2 and 4 hours.
Okay.
Pumped hydro storage PHS tenders, though, typically require much longer durations, usually 6 to 8 hours, and some tenders are specific, demanding either BES or PHS, while others are technology agnostic, basically saying, bring us your best ESS solution.
And what about how they're charged or how often they operate?
Most tenders specify charging from renewable energy sources, which makes sense given India's clean energy goals. But sometimes there's flexibility to charge from conventional sources too.
Right.
Operationally, some tenders specify 1 charge-discharge cycle per day, while others mandate 2 cycles. That points towards an expectation of higher utilization, especially for providing those grid services.
The report includes a really useful comparison table between BES and PHS in India's standalone scene. Let's maybe dig into those key differences from Table 1.
Sure. Table 1 lays it out clearly. As of March 2025, PHS actually had a big lead in tendered capacity, nearly 20 GW, compared to just over 9 GW for PHS.
Interesting.
But if you look at the number of tenders issued, BSS way ahead. 20 tenders versus only 3 for PHS. This suggests a trend towards more, but perhaps smaller, BS projects being tendered.
That's a fascinating contrast. Fewer, but massive PHS tenders.
Exactly. Then you have duration. BS, typically 2 to 4 hours, PHS 6 to 8 hours. BS tenders often specify 1 to 2 daily cycles. That's not really a thing for PHS tenders.
No.
The gestation period is a huge difference. BSS projects can be up and running in maybe 6 to 12 months. PHS takes 6 to 8 years.
Wow, that's an enormous difference in deployment speed.
It really is. Another key point is VGF support currently available for standalone BSS, but not for PHS.
Okay.
Now, operational capacity as of March 2025 still heavily favors PHS 4.7 GW versus only 0.13 GW for BSS, but the pipeline capacity is much closer, 3.1 GW DBSS, 3.5 GW PHS.
Getting closer.
And finally, the PPA periods, the power purchase agreements. They're much longer for PHS, typically 25 to 40 years, whereas BESS PPAs are generally shorter, around 8 to 12 years.
So historically, PHS was the main game, but BESS is catching up fast, driven by renewables. The report mentions India's 2030 storage targets. How do these two fit in?
India's aiming for 42 GW of BSS and 19 GW of PHS by 2030. That clearly shows they're seen as complementary.
Right.
PHS is vital for that large-scale, long-duration storage needed for deep renewable penetration. But its high costs and long timelines make BESS more competitive and faster to deploy right now, especially for immediate grid balancing and leveraging that VGF support.
It seems like PHS has that long-term strategic role, But the immediate action, the current momentum in standalone ESS is really being driven by the agility and the policy boost for BSS.
That's a fair summary. Yep.
Okay, let's look closer at the standalone ESS tenders issuance trends. That exponential rise since 2022 is quite something.
It really has been remarkable. Figure 3 in the report shows it vividly, from just half a gigawatt tendered in 2022 to over 31 GW by March 2025. That's a massive jump.
Astonishing. What's really fueling this explosion?
Well, several things. Discoms like the flexibility they get in deciding how to use the stored energy, and developers handle the charging and discharging. So it's attractive on both sides. But the report really hammers home the impact of policy, especially that Viability Gap Funding scheme. It's made a huge difference to the financial viability.
And we saw that huge surge just in early 2025, 11 new tenders, more than all of 2024 combined.
Exactly. And the VGF scheme, offering up to 30% CapEx subsidy for that first tranche, that's been the main driver. 9 out of those 11 new tenders in early 25 used VGF support.
So those financial incentives are clearly working, having a really tangible impact. Now, interestingly, the report notes BSS was a smaller slice of the total capacity tendered, but made up most of the number of tenders. What does that tell us?
It suggests, I think, a preference for the scalability and flexibility you get with batteries. While one big PHS project adds a lot of capacity, the sheer number of BA's tenders indicates a strategy of deploying more modular, adaptable systems across different locations to meet various grid needs.
The report also mentions a big PHS tender that ran into trouble. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, that was the Rewa Ultra Mega Solar Limited RO MSL tender in Madhya Pradesh, a huge 16.4 GW standalone PHS tender from 2023.
Right.
But it got suspended. Basically, they ran into major challenges finding suitable sites and acquiring land needed. It might get revised and reissued later, but it highlights the difficulties with large PHS projects.
And in terms of storage duration in these tenders, is there a clear preference emerging?
Yes, definitely for BS. 2-hour duration is dominant, accounting for nearly 57% of the tendered BESS capacity. PHS tenders, as we said, almost always require longer durations, like 6 to 8 hours, playing to their strengths.
Makes sense matching the tech to the need. What about how often they're expected to operate? The cycle specifications.
BSS tenders generally lean towards higher utilization. Most mandate 2 charge-discharge cycles per day. This really underlines their role in providing those fast response grid balancing services. PHS, given the longer discharge, doesn't usually have those same daily cycle mandates.
Yeah, who are the main players issuing these tenders? Is it central government, state agencies?
It's actually a mix, which is interesting. Figure 5 breaks it down. At the central level, NTPC has been a major issuer for BS.
Okay.
But state agencies are very active too. We see GUVNL in Gujarat, MSEDCL in Maharashtra. They're issuing tenders to meet their specific regional grid needs.
So a coordinated push, it seems, both national and state level. What about these pan-India tenders mentioned? What's their significance?
Those are quite substantial, 8.75 GW issued under pan-India tenders. The key thing here is they give developers flexibility in choosing where to build the project based on grid access, land availability, etc.
Unlike state tenders tied to specific locations.
Exactly. State tenders are usually targeting specific grid issues within that state. The pan-India ones offer more freedom.
It sounds like a smart mix of approaches. And the Resource Adequacy Planning Framework from mid-2023, how did that fit in?
That framework was pretty important. It provided a clear directive, a structured way for both central and state bodies to figure out their future storage needs. It definitely helped spur on a lot of these storage initiatives we're seeing now.
Okay, great overview of the tendering trends. Now let's shift to what happens after the standalone ESS auction analysis. What are the key takeaways from the auction results?
Right. So about 7 GW of standalone ESS capacity has been awarded across 12 tenders since early 2022. Looking at the auction results, especially the tariffs, gives us real insights into the cost trends and some of the deployment challenges. Figure 6 in the report maps this out.
Let's start with PHS. The report compares an NTPC tender from 2022 with a more recent MSEDCL one from 2024. What's the story there?
Okay, so the NTPC PHS tender in 22 came in at about Rs 1.4 million per MW per month. Fast forward to the MSEDCL PHS tender in March 24, and the tariff was significantly lower, around Rs 705,000 per MW per month.
Wow, almost half. Why such a big drop?
The report suggests 2 main reasons. First, the MSEDCL tender was for a much larger project capacity, economies of scale kicking in.
Uh-huh.
Second, it specified an 8-hour storage duration, which really placed the strengths and cost-effectiveness of PHS technology for that kind of long discharge. So, better alignment led to better pricing.
Makes sense. Scale and suitability. What about BS auctions? The report mentions falling tariffs there too.
Yes, a very clear and consistent downward trend for BS tariffs. This is largely driven by falling battery prices globally.
Right.
The report points to a TIRI auction in 2023 and a GUVNL Phase 3 auction in 2024 showing this trend even before VGF really kicked in widely. So BS is getting more competitive anyway.
And then Viability Gap Funding arrived in September 2023. How did that accelerate things?
Massively. VGF, initially offering up to 40% CapEx support, really amplified the cost reduction, even after it was revised down slightly for the first tranche to max 30% or a fixed RS 4.6 million per MWh. It made a huge impact.
How much of an impact?
Well, look at the MSEDCL auction in August 24, or the RVUNL one in November 24. These VGF-backed projects saw tariffs roughly 40% lower than comparable non-VGF projects for similar 2-hour durations. It clearly shows how effective that financial nudge has been.
That's a dramatic reduction.
Yeah.
Very effective incentive. The report also mentions a Sanjikai BESS tender that had a higher tariff. Why was that?
Yes. The SSCI tender in 2024 had a higher tariff, mainly because it required a 4-hour energy storage duration.
Longer duration, higher cost for being.
Exactly. It directly shows the cost impact of pushing batteries for longer durations. It's worth noting, though, that there were 6 other tenders issued for 4-hour storage, so there's definitely interest in exploring that space, despite the extra cost.
So overall, what's the takeaway from the auction analysis comparing PHS and BSES competitiveness?
The conclusion is that the cost gap seems to be widening, favoring B in many scenarios. BSS benefits from faster deployment, more site flexibility, and crucially, that policy support like VGF. This likely means BSS will dominate standalone ESS tenders, at least in the near term, because it's often quicker and more cost-effective to deploy for many grid needs.
And the report dives deep into the Viability Gap Funding scheme itself. Can you give us the key points of how this crucial program works?
Sure. The main goal is to get 13,200 milliwatters of BSS deployed by FY 2027-28. It offers significant financial help initially, up to 40% of CapEx, then revised for tranche A to max 30%, or Rs 4.6 million MWH.
Okay.
For later tranches and state CPSU tenders, the VGF cap is lower, at Rs 2.7 million MWH. Developers are chosen via competitive tariff bidding. Contracts are typically 10-12 years. There are limits on how much capacity one developer can get.
Right.
The actual VGF amount is decided by a Ministry of Power committee and paid out in 5 stages based on project milestones. The total planned budget is pretty big, Rs 94 billion.
It sounds like a really structured plan to kickstart the market. The report also mentions the BS balancing pool, BBP. What does that do?
The BBP is actually quite clever. It's a financial mechanism to manage revenue fluctuations across all the VGF-supported BS projects.
How does it work?
If a project earns more revenue than its fixed costs plus the agency's margin, the extra cash goes into the pool. If a project has a shortfall, the pool compensates it.
So it smooths out the ups and downs for individual projects.
Exactly. It aims to stabilize revenues over the project life, reducing market risk and boosting investor confidence. It acts like a safety net.
A financial shock absorber, in a way. To make this more real, the report includes a case study. The Terry BSC's Rajdhani Standalone BSS. What's special about this project?
This one in Delhi is significant because it's India's first commercial standalone BSS at the distribution level to get regulatory tariff approval.
Okay, first of its kind.
Yeah. It's a collaboration tariff, BSES Rajdhani Power Limited, BRPL, GAPP, Indigrid Ampere-Hour Energy. The goal is better grid stability and more renewables integration in South Delhi. And crucially, GATP provided a concessional loan for 70% of the cost.
That's huge. That kind of financing must have been key. What are the project specifics?
It's a 20 milliW BSS, providing 40 milliwattage of storage. Indigrid and Ampere-Hour won the bid. The levelized annual tariff is Rs 5.8 million per milliW per year. BRPL is the off-taker. It was commissioned in April 2025, has a 12-year life, needs to do 2 cycles a day, maintain 95% availability, and its round-trip efficiency starts at 85%, dropping slightly over time.
So what exactly does BRPL, the utility, hope to achieve with this BES?
Primarily, they want better grid reliability in their area and to cut down on buying expensive power during peak times. It helps manage load fluctuations and integrate more renewables locally. It's placed strategically at a high-demand substation and should also improve power quality for over 100,000 low-income consumers nearby.
And it's already up and running, which is great. What are the big lessons learned from this pilot?
Several key takeaways. One is the importance of value stacking using the BAES for multiple things like arbitrage, ancillary services, maybe even deferring grid upgrades to make the economics work.
Right, multiple revenue streams.
Exactly. Also, the need for early engagement with regulators to smooth approvals and align with policy. And again, it underscores how vital schemes like VGF are for de-risking these investments. BRPL and GAPP plan to share the data and learnings, which is great for wider adoption. Being the first with regulatory approval sets a really important precedent.
It really provides a concrete example of how these things work on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's broaden that again. Who are the key players in the standalone ESS market? Who's actually building and operating these systems?
Well, it's still an early stage market, but participation is definitely picking up, especially since 2024. You've got a mix. There are the established energy giants, IPPs like JSW Energy, Greenco, Torrent Power. But you also see newer entrants, EPC firms, tech providers like Pace Digitech, Bondada Engineering getting involved.
Who's leading the pack in terms of awarded capacity right now?
JSW Energy is out front with nearly 2 GW awarded. Then you have IndiGrid, HG Infra Engineering, and Gensel Engineering, each with over 300 mW. Figure 7 in the report shows the breakdown.
Interesting mix. Are they focusing on specific technologies, JSW, for instance?
There's a bit of a split. PHS capacity is dominated by players like JSW Energy, Torrent Power, and Greenco. Greenco is solely focused on PHS in this segment.
Okay.
Others are diversifying into BTS, and notably some newer players, Pace Digitech, Bondada Engineering, Kintex Energy, Oriana Power, Solar World Energy Solutions. They've specifically secured BES capacities. That shows growing interest in battery solutions.
The report predicts who might dominate large-scale BESS going forward. What's the thinking?
The expectation is that the large, established energy companies will likely lead large-scale BES deployment. Why? They have the financial muscle, the experience with big infrastructure projects, and crucially, the clout to secure those long-term PPAs with utilities.
Makes sense. What about the companies actually making the storage systems, the OEMs? Are they mostly Indian or international?
For grid-scale ESS, the OEMs are still mostly international. You know, the big names in lithium-ion like Samsung, LG Chem.
Right.
There are Indian battery manufacturers like Exide, Exacom, but they're mainly assembling packs using imported cells, mostly from China right now.
So still a significant import dependency there. Looking ahead, with more tenders coming, how will the competition shape up?
We can definitely expect more intense competition. IPPs, EPCs, global tech providers, they'll all be vying for these projects. As the scale increases, price competitiveness will become even more critical. Players with economies of scale and efficient execution will likely have an edge.
Okay, we've covered a lot of positive momentum, but now it's time to face the music. The key challenges. Despite progress, the report flags several persistent hurdles.
That's right, and it's crucial to acknowledge them. While the first tender was back in 2022, the market is still nascent. And critically, none of the large utility-scale standalone tenders awarded since then are actually operational yet. That tells you there are real roadblocks.
Let's start with power agreement signing delays and cancellations. This sounds like a major bottleneck.
It really is. We touched on this with the auction trends. Tariffs keep falling. So the off-takers, often discoms, they get hesitant. Why sign a long-term power sale agreement, PSA, today if prices might be even lower tomorrow?
Understandable caution, perhaps, but what are the consequences?
The consequence is delay. And these delays in signing the PSA after the auction have led to regulators rejecting the tariffs in some cases. That nullifies the auction, cancels the tender. The report states that while over 30 GW was tendered by 2024, around 6.4 GW of awarded capacity got canceled because PPAs couldn't be finalized. That's a lot of storage left on the table.
6.4 GW canceled. Was it mainly one technology?
No, it hit across the board. About 3.9 GW of PHS, just over 2 GW of BES, and half a gigawatt of technology-agnostic projects were canceled. It shows it's a systemic issue affecting everyone.
And the report mentioned some recent uncertainty around one specific company's awarded capacity.
Yes, unfortunately. Recent allegations of financial misconduct against Gensel Engineering have created uncertainty around the 320 milliW they were awarded across various tenders. That could lead to more delays or even cancellations there, too.
These contractual issues are clearly a huge hurdle. What other practical project execution challenges are slowing things down?
Two main ones highlighted are limited vendor availability and inadequate domestic manufacturing.
Let's take vendor availability first. What's the issue there?
The installed BESS base in India is still quite small, just over 360 milliwatt each cumulatively, but many projects now being planned or executed are gigawatt-hour scale.
Right, much bigger.
There just aren't that many vendors globally with the proven experience and capacity to deliver GW-scale projects reliably. This creates potential supply chain bottlenecks. Many key EPC players for these big projects in India are either overseas firms or operate via JVs.
So relying on a small pool of often international vendors, what about domestic manufacturing?
Similar to solar, there's a heavy reliance on imports, especially from China, for the core component battery cells. India has the PLI scheme to boost local production, which is good, but we still lack large-scale domestic refining and processing for the raw materials. Building that end-to-end supply chain takes time. In 2023, India's commissioned Li-ion battery manufacturing capacity was only 6.7 GWh, way below demand. Achieving the announced target of 246 GWh by 2035 faces significant hurdles.
So building that domestic pace is a long game. What about the raw materials themselves, the critical minerals availability crunch?
This is a major vulnerability. Getting stable, affordable supplies of lithium, cobalt, nickel, it's tough. China dominates the refining and processing of these minerals globally.
Right.
That leaves India exposed to supply disruptions, price swings, geopolitics. The recent lithium discoveries in J&K and Rajasthan are positive news long term, but we don't have the domestic refining capacity yet. And mining takes years, decades even, from discovery to production. So domestic supply won't meet near-term demand.
It paints a picture of significant reliance on global supply chains for the very foundation of these systems. What about money? Are there financing roadblocks?
Yes, financing is still a hurdle. Investors can be wary. Standalone BESS has high upfront costs, long payback times, and the market is still relatively new.
So higher perceived risk.
Exactly. That can mean tougher loan terms, higher interest rates, concessional finance helps, parent company guarantees help, but they aren't always available. Plus, investors struggle to assess newer BHS chemistries, the sodium-ion, flow batteries, which adds uncertainty. And there are worries about projects that bid super low, banking on future battery cost drops that might not happen as fast as hoped.
So risk perception, long horizons, tech uncertainty, all making finance tricky. Are there challenges specific to PHS-specific inhibitors?
Definitely. The biggest is that long gestation period, up to 10 years sometimes, due to clearances, construction, high capex.
Right.
But most PHS tenders specify much shorter timelines, like 2-3 years. It's a mismatch. This has led to cancellations of awarded PHS projects before construction even starts. And we already mentioned the site land acquisition issues, like in Madhya Pradesh.
So the fundamental nature of PHS doesn't always fit the current tender structures. Lastly, the report mentions a lack of support for alternative storage technologies. Lithium-ion dominates, but what about other options?
Right. Lithium-ion is king right now, but alternatives like sodium-ion or flow batteries have potential advantages. Sodium is abundant in India, potentially reducing import reliance. Flow batteries could be good for long duration.
So why aren't they taking off?
Well, even though schemes like PLI and VGF are technically technology agnostic, there aren't really dedicated incentives or specific funding targeting these alternatives. So lithium-ion, being more mature, gets most of the benefit. The report suggests more support research, pilots, manufacturing incentives for these emerging techs could help diversify India's storage options.
Makes sense to hedge bets and encourage innovation across different technologies. Okay, after laying out all those challenges the report looks to weigh here forward, what are the key recommendations and prospects?
The big picture is that India's ESS market is set for huge expansion. Driven by renewable targets, grid stability needs, it has to happen. The CEA estimates a need for 2380 GWh of storage by 2047. That's massive.
Wow.
Currently, the standalone ESS pipeline is around 5.9 GW, 2.4 GW EES, 3.5 GW PHS, potentially online by 2027 if these challenges are tackled.
So how can we tackle them? What needs to happen with strengthening the policy framework?
More consistency and breadth are needed. Some states like Rajasthan, Andhra Pradesh, MP are integrating storage targets and incentives into their policies, which is great. But this needs to be wider across more states to meet those CEA targets.
No.
The VGF scheme has been vital, but its scope is limited, 13.2 GWH cap. The report suggests maybe expanding VGF to cover tenders by discoms or industrial users and extending the scheme beyond FY 2028. And the SCCI tender cancellation highlights the need for faster contract closures, transparent pricing, a stable regulatory environment overall.
Beyond policy, how can we improve the economics by unlocking additional revenue streams?
Value stacking is the key phrase here, allowing BESS to earn revenue from multiple services, simultaneously arbitrage, peak shaving, ancillary services. BESS is great for fast response stuff like primary reserve ancillary services, PRAS, but we need the market mechanisms to allow that. The canceled SECI pilot for ancillary services shows we need to get these mechanisms up and running.
How can optimizing power exchanges help?
The high price day ahead market, HPDAM, was created for sources like BESS, but transaction volumes have been really low. That needs fixing, maybe refining pricing, boosting participation.
Okay.
The report also suggests integrating ESS into capacity markets. That could offer more stable revenue. And while off-taker-led tenders are growing, they need solid financial backing and standard contracts.
So better market signals, more stable revenue options. What about enhancing financial support beyond VGF?
More concessional financing is critical as the sector scales. Blended finance, like the IndiGrid project backed by IFC and CIF, can really lower capital costs. Expanding this via multilateral banks, using green bonds, these are important avenues.
And finally, back to the supply chain. What are the key steps for strengthening the domestic ESS supply chain?
Reducing that import reliance is paramount. The National Critical Mineral Mission, NCMM, launched this year is a big step aiming to boost exploration, processing, recycling, even acquiring overseas assets.
That sounds promising.
It is, but the report stresses we still lack large-scale domestic refining capacity. So, sustained policy support, infrastructure investment, and linking the NCMM effectively with energy storage policies are all crucial to build that self-reliant domestic chain.
It sounds like a really complex puzzle, needing coordinated action on multiple fronts: policy, markets, finance, supply chain.
Exactly. Robust energy storage isn't optional anymore. It's fundamental for India's renewable future. Standalone ESS is a vital part of that. The growth in these tenders will likely shape a capacity-based market alongside the energy market.
And the BSS versus PHS dynamic.
They'll both play key roles near term, duration being the decider. Longer term, R&D might extend BSS duration, making it competitive even there. We'll likely see large companies dominate development due to the capital involved, leading to consolidation. ESS is becoming central to energy planning. The focus will shift from just deploying to long-term sustainability, maintenance, supply chains, and making support tech-agnostic is key.
This has been an incredibly thorough deep dive. We've covered the rapid growth, the diverse applications, the BES-PHS interplay, the impact of VGF, but also the very real challenges in execution, finance, and supply chains, and the critical steps needed moving forward.
Indeed. It's a complex but absolutely vital piece of India's energy transition puzzle.
And on that note, here's a final thought for you, our listener. Given India's huge renewable ambitions and how essential storage is to make them work, how can the nation best navigate these current complexities? How do we overcome the hurdles to fully unlock the power of standalone ESS and truly guarantee a reliable clean energy future for everyone? It's a massive challenge demanding constant innovation, smart policy, and strong collaboration. Keep an eye on this space. The policy and tech are evolving fast. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.